For the purposes of this conversation, my name is Board. It is one of two of my primary identities. One of them is mostly in the real world, and I go by a different name. But for most of the people listening to this podcast, I go by Board, and I started that identity 13 years ago, also known as Board Elon Musk on X. But on Farcaster, where I am FID 3417. I was lucky enough to get the @Board handle, and I'm proud to say I've operated as a pseudonym for all this time. I think that it's important to be able to partition your identity or identities into different places. And for me, I've spent a long time hopefully building a very strong reputation as Board. And Board benefits from the other guy, the real world guy's experience, which has been in the world of gaming, where I spent over a decade of time learning about the ins and outs of bringing hardware and software products to the United States, which were often built in Japan, and dabbled in things like game design, in communications, and in specifically in the crypto world, have been extremely active for a very long time. And most recently, I've been spending a lot of time in the world of AI, building rapid fire games in a project I call Aircade. So I know we'll want to talk about a lot of these things, but yeah, AI and gaming is a big topic. And then, of course, it would be hard, I think, to have a conversation about crypto and not veer into the meme coin arena. So I did start an interesting project somewhat by accident called Cool. And we can talk about that a little bit as well.
Cool. Well, no pun intended. I think that's a good place to start. And let's first dig into Aircade because, it's interesting with your career background in gaming and everything. Obviously, AI comes along and people are able to do things a lot quicker than they used to. So what's like the experience for you? You rewind, I don't know if it was a decade from now that you've been in gaming or even longer before that, but to back whenever you started, like the process of bringing a game to life versus what you're seeing, within the last 6 months to a year of how easy it is to build a game. Do you have sort of a perspective on just how this might change gaming more broadly before we dig into what you're doing specifically with Aircade?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the time to produce all the things that are needed in a game is getting much, much shorter. I think back a couple of years ago, I was working on designing a tabletop game. So not a digital game, but one that was actually, printed and played in a traditional way. And I spent about 12 months designing all the components, cards, colors, pieces, symbols, whatever it is that goes into a game. And then I spent about 3 months designing the mechanics of the game. And I think the fundamental difference with things like AI is like you can flip that on its head. You can spend way more time designing the game mechanics and testing and refining what is actually the game. The rules of the game is the game, right? The production of the thing that houses the rules is a different entity. And so what AI has done for both physical and digital games is it's giving people way more time to actually refine the core product, which is like, what is the game loop? What is the thing that's really fun? And less time on the tedious things, which is designing characters and graphics and symbols and all these things. And it's both magical and sort of a hard pill to swallow, because you think back, if you've worked in the space for a long time, you think back to all that time you spent trying to crank out these things or paying people to crank out these things that were necessary. And now you can do it in a matter of weeks or days, if not even shorter. And you're like, damn, I wish I had all that time back. But I try not to be salty about it. I try to think about how someone like me, who maybe doesn't have hardcore, developer skills, can now take all the ideas I've had over the years for building a game, and taking my wisdom around building game mechanics, and then just, as people say these days, vibe code my way to something that's fun in a very short amount of time and repeat over and over and over. So I'm excited about what it means for the independent game creator, for the big game companies, and I think even for the game consumer, the player. it's going to be a little bit of a Wild West and perhaps a frustrating time because there's going to be so much output, right? We're not going to just have like 10,000 games a year that get released, which was the current status quo. It's going to be millions. And how do you sift through that? How do you compete against that if you're a game maker? How do you stand out? Much like almost every other form of media, AI is going to increase the output of creativity or rather content exponentially. And so we're now in a very difficult attention game that again is good for the independent creator, but I think messy for everybody else.
Yeah, sounds like meme coins, but I don't want to go in that direction just yet. When you're like sort of, vibe coding these games up and bringing some of these ideas to life that you've been, noodling on for some time, but used to sort of require, more resources to be able to bring to fruition. Like, are you running up against limits where you're like, oh, man, I know like with, a proper team, like we could do this, that, and the other thing, but as cool as this, AI is, and as much as it accelerates the process, there's these certain like sort of limits of things that I actually still would need help for, or are most of those things actually solved with sort of the tools that you have?
They're not solved. I mean, there definitely are still challenges, and I'll give you a very specific example. So most of the games I've been building now, actually all the games I've been building, are one-player games, right? So you interact with the machine. The only form of sort of multiplayer elements to it is that if there's a high scoreboard, the game will remember your high score and compare it to other people on a leaderboard. That's right. It. So when you're building that kind of game, right now the problem is solved. Like you can build assets very quickly. You can code up a game that's fairly simple. That's one player quickly. Once you get into multiplayer where you have hundreds or thousands of people playing at the same time, then you're talking about databases and interactivity and server costs. So that gets more complicated. Is it easier today than it was a year ago? 100% yes, it was. But I'm personally reaching my limits to some degree because I'm not yet able to build out multiplayer games the way I want to. So this is kind of the challenge for me is I want to start with one-player games, perfect that, get that right, and then expand to multiplayer because I think at this point, people are very much used to playing multiplayer games, and I want to be able to bring those to market as well.
How about with like the integration of crypto stuff? Is that another sort of boundary that you'll run up against that can be difficult if you want to, have, people winning crypto or earning crypto or things like that throughout the game? Or is that piece, I don't know if you've dabbled with that piece, but curious if that's sort of a similar to multiplayer, sort of added complexity that you would need to sort of go out of scope for.
Yeah, I would say it's at parity to the multiplayer aspect because it's really like a lot of stuff that's happening outside of the game, which is transactions, security, wallet connect, that sort of thing. But the furthest I've gotten so far is being able to allow people to connect with a wallet and basically have their wallet address displayed as their high score. What I want to do with Aircade is definitely go down two paths. And this is the reason why tokens even make sense inside of games. One is you can think about games of skill. So anybody who's familiar with poker and poker tournaments, very simple idea. A bunch of people come together, they put in money into a pool, and then the top, 3 or 10 players will get the prize pool. So that's kind of the game of skill piece. And then the other is cosmetics and making yourself look cool. And that's a staple of video games, right? Like I've played this game, I'm really good at it. I play with lots of other people in multiplayer. I want to stand out and not have the generic, items that are given to me. So I'll pay money or, let's say in this case, crypto to upgrade myself. So those are the two areas I want to explore. And definitely I don't have the skill set yet to do that myself. I'm trying very hard to see how far I can go by myself because I like this idea of like a one-man game studio. But I'm also at a point where I might hit a limit and I do need some help from the outside. So I'm challenging myself for now, and we'll see how frustrated I get before I start to cry uncle and ask for some assistance.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. And like I sympathize with the ambition of like sort of being a one-man studio. I'm not as focused myself on, gaming necessarily, but you see, like, I don't know, there's this chart that I'm probably going to butcher it a little bit, but I sort of have it in mind, like directionally what it is, which is basically like the number of people employed by organizations that achieved like $1 billion market cap or 100 million in revenue. Again, I don't remember like the exact stat, but like, companies that have gotten big, and it shows like over time, year by year since, I don't know, maybe I'm basically making up all these numbers, but directionally, this is going to be the right takeaway, which is that like it's maybe showing like the last 30 years, and companies get to a certain milestone, how many employees they have, and that number has gone from like rough. I don't know exactly what it was, but it was like maybe 100 something to like 7 or something like that.
Wow.
And like that number, and that was like I saw this chart actually before ChatGPT came out, so it sort of gives you an idea like. That obviously has accelerated a bunch of things. Like this was before even AI sort of had this next phase that it's been in for the last couple of years or whatever, and is continuing to go through. So that number just seems like it's poised to go to like, from 7 to 6 to 5 to 4 to 3 to 2 to maybe to 1. And maybe there is a reason why it sort of, hits an asymptote or whatever at 3 or 2, because maybe
Someone's got to run the machines,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like maybe there's like sort of a complementary thing where it's like actually the 2 or 3 man team makes more sense than the one in the long run or something like that. But in general,
you could even go further and just say that it does actually go to 1 and it goes below 1 in the sense that one person will then control 10 AIs that control 100 companies each. Right. So then it comes down to who wins in that competition, right? If we're all doing the capitalism thing, then whoever has the most resources, aka energy, money, chips, etc., will just keep spinning up more and more and more to compete. Because it's not like the utopia we all wanted was the machines will do all the work and we can just chill on the beach and not work. But that's not how it worked out. How it ended up, right? It's just like global competition means that you keep making the machine bigger and making more money. Otherwise, you lose to the other players.
Yeah, it's I guess that's the global game that's going on in real time. But yeah, anyway, I sort of have this similar ambition as well of like I don't really like prior generations. If you wanted to do some big successful company or achieve some big successful mission or whatever, like you sort of needed to scale in terms of people, and I just don't really have, at least at this point in my life, like I don't really have an ambition to like manage tens and however many people who then manage tens of people and so on. Like it just seems like sort of a big unnecessary headache, and I feel like a lot of companies that are around that are big today, like this was a while ago, I think it was, I don't know if it was like around COVID times or what it was exactly when it was, but people were like, some of these big companies were laying off a bunch of employees under like sort of the banner that like a recession might be coming, or like whatever sort of like the financial economic macro excuse was. But this was also around the time that AI was getting good, and I was like pretty sure these companies are just realizing they just don't need all of these people. So I mean, you saw obviously what Elon did at X and everything like that. Like I guess the the less bored brother of yours did it at X, and I think any excuse from like the macro for these companies, like especially the Facebook and Google and the big tech companies, Apple, whatever, like any excuse to do a big riff is just like sort of welcomed at this point, and they might sort of ascribe it to this other reason, but really it's just like we realize that we're not going to probably need to be adding people ever. Like we should just be going down from here and replacing people with machines, basically. So I don't know. It'll be curious what it all comes out. But I like people like, what's his name? Forgetting his name. The guy who made like Nomad List on Twitter. He's actually a good example because he's got like 6 or 7 not little, but like not huge companies that are all each like doing independently well at sort of a moderate level, and I'm pretty sure he just like runs them all like fairly passively himself. I think that's like sort of a better model for founders and entrepreneurs of the future?
I mean, for humans in general, I mean, I love that. And I don't remember like who first said this quote to me, but the general idea is like never put your future in the hands of one entity. And what that means is, if you work at a company and 99% of your income comes from that company, and then that company decides they don't need you anymore, you're in a bad place. And so I think it's much better to diversify your revenue streams and be able to protect yourself and your family. And so I think that if AI enables that type of a future, that's a net positive. So while people are nervous that, oh, I can't get job X anymore, for this big company because this big company doesn't need as many people, that may be true, but you could open yourself up to do all these other things that before were not possible because you didn't have technology enabling you and filling in the gaps of your skill set.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So one more thing before I do want to get to Cool and bouncing around about Banker and meme coins and all this stuff. But before we move on from the gaming, would be curious, sort of like what led you, like how did you decide on the first few games to release for Aircade, and outside of Aircade, are there games that have been interesting to you, especially, of late, but also even if it's been, a few years ago, just as sort of like precedents for what's interesting or possible, whether or not they were sort of like aided in their creation by AI or whatever, just sort of what flavor of games are you interested in, basically? Obviously the skill and you mentioned like sort of the skill based as opposed to the luck based, but I'm curious to sort of like do a double click on the flavor of games that you've decided to start with and what you might like to do in the future.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what we want to build with Aircade, and when I say we, I really just referring to myself.
You and the AIs.
And my AI army. I mean, it's a product of two factors. One is building casual games makes sense because they're easier for me to grasp in the stage of development that I'm in terms of my skill set. And two, the majority of people who play games play casual games, right? We hear about the really big ones, but yeah, I mean, the vast majority of people, they play the 5 to 10 to 15 minute mobile game, and that's where they spend most of their time. So for those reasons, I want to build those types of games. In terms of the flavor, I mean, going back to what I said, with AI assistance, people are now able to build this type of game very quickly and easily relative to where they were a couple of years ago. So the way I'm thinking about Aircade is the intersection of games and memes. So I think that the gaming industry is going to basically go towards two ends of the spectrum. One is going to be the massive AAA, takes hundreds of millions of dollars to create like a Grand Theft Auto or Call of Duty, and then on the other end of the spectrum are going to be these little indie games that people can spin up very quickly. And so if I'm going to compete in the latter, then how do they stand out, right? If there's going to be like 10,000 racing games made a day because it's so easy to vibe code them, like how do you stand out? So that's where the memes come in. What I want to do is find something that is hot at the moment in terms of the cultural zeitgeist, like what are people talking about, what is trending, and then quickly skin a familiar type of game mode to that topic. So the first game that I did this with was called Doge Survivor, and Doge is obviously the meme coin that has existed for a very long time, but Doge is also the Department of Government Efficiency that Elon's been running, and so a very hot topic for the last few weeks has been finding inefficiencies in the government and cutting allegedly unnecessary parts of that system. So because that's a really hot topic, I said, let's make a game out of that. I took a pretty common game genre, which was made popular recently by a game called Vampire Survivor, which is basically like you're on an overhead map. There's more enemies that are surrounding you over time, and it gets crazier and crazier, and you're able to just wipe out hundreds or thousands of enemies at a time and escape them and survive as long as possible. So that became Doge Survivor. I basically reskinned a game that everyone has seen, but made it topical. And so that's what I want to keep doing, is building these games that are really only relevant for a couple of weeks, if that, maybe days, and then just crank them out so quickly that I can compete with essentially the speed of information and the speed of news. So I take a day to make one of these games, and then it maybe lasts for 3 days because after that it's not interesting or relevant anymore, and then repeat over and over and over. So that's kind of my angle, and that's what I want to go for. And I'm not reinventing the wheel in terms of coming up with new game mechanics, even though that's really fun. It's impossibly difficult to do it, and it's a very high risk because just because it's new doesn't mean it's good. So here I'm taking my sort of skill set in being able to parse the internet and pick out things that I think are interesting stories, and then turn them into games that I think people will play because they're just shareable. They're funny, and it gives you social currency to both play them and want to post them on the internet. So that's been my strategy, in terms of creating and in terms of play.
Yeah.
I've liked just one player indie games because I'm at a point in my life where I don't want to spend 4 hours playing some multiplayer game where I have to level up and all that. I just kind of want to zone out for 30 minutes before bed, and and then I'm done.
Yeah, no, it's I love the strategy. Actually, it's like extremely concrete, and the rationale makes a lot of sense to me, or the logic rather. I'm just trying to think. I had a couple of directions I wanted to go from there. Oh, one was, it's always interesting, I think, when I found this myself, where I've had like this blue PFP since I started doing things on the internet, and then like 4 years after I started doing things on the internet, I went and did like the NFT collection for every color on the internet with base colors, and like I had no idea. I mean, I didn't even know what NFTs weren't really even a thing when I started doing the first when I made my profile picture, the color NFT or the color PFP that was not an NFT. And then sort of serendipitously end up doing that thing. And I think so it's always interesting basically when something from your past becomes relevant in a way that you couldn't have anticipated or expected. And I think one thing for you is, I forget the name of what you were calling this, but it was like, I believe it was 4 things like that happened this week or something like that.
Oh yeah, this week on the internet or last week on the internet. Yeah.
Yeah, and you had like 4 pictures, right?
Exactly. And it was just kind of like the 4, things that everybody was talking about over the last week. And, if we were to do that exercise this week, it would of course be like the Ghibli, Ghiblification of art and a few other things. But yeah, everybody was like the recurring comment. Unfortunately, I kept it up for a few months and I stopped. But the reaction I got most often was like, wow, I can't believe that was only a week ago, because the speed of the internet now is so wild that we just move from one thing to another. And so I would include like something that happened 6 days ago in my weekly recap, and people thought it, was like from a decade ago or something.
Yeah, it's like you're using last week's content. What are you doing? But it's like 4 days ago. Yeah. So anyway, I think what's interesting, I don't know if this might not have been that easy for you to connect, but for me, outside perspective, it's kind of makes sense that like that is actually like you've basically been sharpening this skill that will, I think, translate extremely well to your strategy for game building, where like if you have the 4 things of the week, that's basically your 4 games for the week. Like if you actually can produce a game every 2 days or something like that, you're going to have roughly like 3 games a week or something like that. And you've been for, however long practicing identifying like the 4 top things that week. And like, you might not consider that to be a skill, but I couldn't do it. Like I don't know what the heck's going on. Like I mean, sometimes I have I know about the Ghibli. I probably could have got that one, but I don't know what else to name this week. Like I just
was a reach, but yeah, I think you spend enough time on Twitter, and you just kind of start to see trends emerge, and I think to like that scene in The Matrix where the guy is just looking at code on the screen, but he actually sees the world as it appears in The Matrix. And that's kind of how I look at Twitter these days. I mean, I think with the game stuff, like if I'm really ambitious this year, I'm going to do 1 a week. Like I think 1 game a week is pretty damn good. Yes, I could do 2 to 3, but I think I'll run out of stuff to build, and it'll lose its specialness. But I think, man, if you crank out like 40, 50 games a year, that's obscene. Like that's like a metric that nobody in gaming would ever even say is normal. even if they're hyper casual games. And so now you can do that. So I'm going to hold myself to that. The game I'm building right now and will release soon is basically. Did you ever play Contra, or a game where it's like you're scrolling down the side and more enemies show up to attack you?
I'm not familiar with that one, no.
Well, basically the premise of this game, and it's a working title, but it's going to be like Tesla, Tesla Defense or something like that. But I'm going to have a cyber truck that's just driving on the road, and then there are zombies with Molotov cocktails and keys and protest signs that are trying to destroy the Tesla. And you'll get a variety of weapons to defend yourself as long as you can. So, obviously very topical. If people are listening to this within the next, week or so, they will know that there's been a collection of incidents of Teslas being destroyed for a variety of reasons. And so, that's what I'm working on this week. And then next week it'll be something else. I'm trying not to get too political, but it's also hard to avoid these stories because they're so hot. If I really wanted to tap into like the Ghibli thing, I could have made a game about that last week, but I felt like the art style would be too difficult to animate, so I just kind of skipped over it. But that's kind of where my head's at, is like, what's the thing that's trending? How fast can I move to make the game? And then just put it out there, and hopefully it catches on. And at the end of the year, I'm hoping that of the 40 or 50 games I produce, 2 or 3 of them will just be monster hits that get millions of plays.
Yeah, I mean, it's a combination of that's also why I love the strategy, because it's being practical about the fact that there's going to be tons of competition, and like it's not really worth it probably to spend a ton of time on one game when you're just going to have a tough time getting attention sort of regardless. So you have to sort of take a bunch of shots on goal. And if you do 50 games in a year, even 25, maybe you get one great one, 50, maybe you get a few. And even if you get one, it's a massive hit. I mean, that pays for the rest of them or whatever. Like it's well worth all the time. And like, I'm sure, building this portfolio of games also just gonna be like a lot of fun, and you'll have this large collection where maybe if one does go off, people start exploring the others and whatnot. I think also, we talked about your practice over the years of identifying like the top 4 things of the week or whatever it might be. You combine that skill, which probably is, I don't have that, but, some other people might, somewhat on the level that you do or close to it or something. But then you combine that, like that skill alone is not enough to be able to go make games of all these things, and like identify the best topic for the week to make a game of. You also are bringing your, 10 years of experience working in games and many more of playing games, I'm sure, to be able to like pattern match, like with the Tesla idea, you have like sort of a template game that you can bring out of your, brain that matches like the trending topic. And like, I just don't think that many people are going to have that combination where they have the ability to identify what would be a good thing to make a game for right now, and the strategy that you have overall of doing it that way and building games that way, and the library in your head of various game templates to sort of fit to the trend based on what makes sense. Yeah,
I mean, the games industry, especially mobile gaming, has been nothing but copying, right? Like somebody builds a game and then there's 1,000 copies of that, and that works well. You don't have to really like do the work of testing it to make sure it works. It's just like, I'm going to reproduce this thing cheaper, and even if I get 10% of the market share, it's fine. Which is kind of a sad state of affairs. But I do think that I have some advantage in that I can spot these trends quickly, and I do have like the deep design knowledge of games to understand what is fun and what isn't. And it's not a foolproof strategy. I mean, other people will take this approach, especially if I show that it works well. But I just want to have first mover advantage. Like I want to try to own this idea of meme games, because I don't think, at least in the first 3 to 6 months from now, that people are going to do this as well as I can. So I want to establish the brand of Aircade.
And not just the first mover advantage, but you've got a distribution advantage as well, especially on Twitter, and probably increasingly on
this is true.
Warpcast as well.
That is
I mean, if someone with like no followers anywhere, 1,000 followers on Twitter went and tried to do this, like they would have the biggest part of the challenge probably would just be sort of compounding the distribution. I know your distribution is like somewhat scattered in terms of like why they're there following you and whatnot, like from the various chapters of what you've done, but regardless, like however many followers you have, it's a good it's going to help to some degree to at least sort of.
Yeah, and it gives me credibility, and it makes it a little bit easier for people to like test something out that I've built for the first time. So I don't discount that. X/Twitter is not the greatest at converting people to actually go and do something, but nonetheless, it's a head start, and I recognize that most people who are probably in the games business have zero as their starting point, and they have to like rely on paid advertising or just hustling to get any attention. So I certainly will take advantage of that.
Yeah, it is really tough. You mentioned that like it's like converting people from Twitter to do anything besides like the tweet, like converting them off platform to do like basically anything is such a tall order for some. Like, I mean, even more so with the links, I think, hurting tweet performance now for the last couple of years or whatever it's been. It's just really tough, which is, good for X, I guess, but bad for anyone with distribution trying to bring people anywhere besides X. So shifting gears a little bit, let's talk Cool. Maybe you can start with just sort of like the origin story, how it came to be, somewhat by accident, like you said, and then we can dig into, what's your latest thinking on it and how it's going.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've already talked about BankerBot at all, but I can do a quick recap. So I think the origin story is important here. There's a fantastic team building something called Banker, which essentially is kind of like a wallet, like a crypto wallet that exists, but it's controlled through text, right? So you can go on Farcaster, or you can go on Twitter and basically say, I want to buy X token, or I want to send X token to this person, right? So I'm gonna do it right now while we're on this pod. I'm gonna send of Jake 10 million Cool token at BankerBot.
Whoa, that's a lot of Cool.
That's a lot of Cool.
Sure you want to send me that much Cool?
I was actually going to do even more.
No. 10 million is plenty. I just, as long as I'm a Cool millionaire, I might already be, honestly, but yeah, I don't have the units in mind as much as the dollars. But yeah, just however much Cool you want to send me, I could use some Cool.
But yeah, so I think this was a really big unlock. I was watching this bot, and basically people sending around money and creating tokens. And I started talking about it because I thought it was really interesting. And then somebody like was in my replies saying, "Oh, you should drop a Cool token." And I was like, "Okay, BankerBot, drop a Cool token." They just made it. And this is a little bit of a like, let's just try shit out and see what happens, and then figure out why it's important after the fact. But first of all, I mean, this was really interesting because on Twitter, on X, essentially a token was deployed based on me just saying stuff. I didn't have to, go and make a wallet, sign transactions. It just did it. And it picked a word that in retrospect, I think was amazing. Like in this conversation, we've probably said the word cool, not because we're talking about that token, but because just in natural, settings, we've probably mentioned it 10 times. It's a very commonly used word in the English language. And so my strategy after this token was created was, okay, like, well, basically this thing's a meme coin. Most meme coins have no value, but how can the meme of Cool be valuable? How can we make it interesting? And so what I decided to do with this, besides just being a meme, a very old meme, which is the idea of Cool, whatever that means to you, is let's turn it into something that helps people acknowledge and celebrate others through economic, engagement. So what does that translate to? Most people on social media will like, retweet, comment, blah, 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 subscribe. This is how you show appreciation for other people that you think are cool. At least in the West, people don't send each other money. They don't tip. It's awkward. And so first of all, it's awkward. Second of all, just technically speaking, it's always been very clunky. And sort of hard to onboard people. And what BankerBot and tools like it have done is they've just made it built into the system. Like I don't have to install a browser plugin. I don't have to create anything. I can just load up my wallet or have people send me money to the wallet that was created by BankerBot, and then I can just send out money to people or create tokens or swap or do whatever I want. I just tell the system what to do on X the way I'm tweeting at a person. And so I decided that for Cool, I just wanted to be a really visible tipping system. Like I started sending literally billions of Cool token out to other people because I wanted to model the behavior that I wanted to see happen on social media. And a lot of people followed my footsteps and they started sending Cool to their friends. It didn't matter if it was a little bit or a lot. I wanted to give this meme token purpose through making people celebrate each other in a very public way. And I think that, going back to sort of the awkwardness piece of it, whenever it comes to giving money, I think people just don't like to talk about it because they don't want to make the recipient feel awkward, or they don't want to make themselves feel awkward because they feel like, well, I'm not giving enough money and I look cheap or whatever it is. And with Cool, I didn't want people to think about that anymore. I just wanted people to pick arbitrary amounts of this token, send it to somebody on Twitter, and let everybody see it. And by letting everybody see it, they reinforce this behavior that it's okay, it's not awkward, you should do this often. And in a way, it's a flex. Like how much Cool you give out every day on Twitter can actually be a flex for you the same way an NFT is, or wearing a luxury watch is, or whatever it might be. That's the goal of Cool. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's taken off quite a bit. A lot of people on the Base network have taken notice of it. And I really just kind of want to nail this and be focused. Like, I think when meme coins get created, the founders or the creators of them will try 1,000 different things to make the meme coin be valuable. And in this case, I just want to do this one thing really well, which is make people think Cool whenever they want to send somebody token. And if I can do that right, we can look at other ways to expand. But that's been my strategy. So that's a little bit of the origin story. Definitely suggest people check out BankerBot and play with it if they haven't already. And if you tweet at me and say that you heard this this podcast, I will send you some Cool. I can't promise how much, but it'll be more than one and less than 10 billion Cool. So there's an open invitation for your listeners.
There you go. That's great. Anyone can listen here and just get some Cool. I think that a few things that come to mind as you're mentioning this, and I love, like, we talked a little bit before starting the recording. I love to be able to do something kind of just for fun, a little bit of an experiment, playing around with Banker. I guess, so one quick thing. Did you use Banker much before this? Were you somewhat familiar, but not, you hadn't launched a token with Banker yet? Like, what was your sort of pre-existing Banker experience?
I've been playing with it for a couple of weeks. I had put some money into the Banker token. I thought what they were building or are building was fascinating. And so it didn't really strike me. I didn't really think to make a meme coin or deploy a coin until somebody kind of flippantly said I should. And then I did. Right. I was 2 weeks into it, but then after that, I just dove in, and I've talked to the founders now and built a relationship with them, and have been in the weeds on it. And I think it's an incredible development in the world of online transactions intersecting with social media, which to date has been very difficult. Like, those two worlds have lived very separate from each other, and I feel like with this type of tech, they can come together.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is we were starting to see it, come more together on Farcaster, and Banker, I feel like, has been leading on bringing it to X, which is harder because it's not like you've got the API you've got to pay for, and it's just not as open as Farcaster, and not really built for it. But you can sort of make it work. Obviously, Banker has done a great job. But yeah, I love how basically after doing this thing somewhat casually, you're able to say look, this actually fits to something that I genuinely believe in, and we're going to sort of take this one thing. We have a good sort of setup with, like you said, Cool is just a super popular word or meme in a sense, to the extent that a word basically is a meme if it's popularly used, especially as sort of a slang sort of thing, whatever. So you had sort of the setup, and then you needed a purpose, and I feel like you were able to match a great purpose. And I feel like, with what you've described, a few things that came to mind for me is like, it would be cool to see see there, I actually didn't mean to like use the word cool because it's cool, but I just did. But it would be cool to see like one, I think a leaderboard of people who have sent the most cool, like basically what you're optimizing for is people sending cool, which is very different from people buying cool or the price of cool or a bunch of other things that could be sort of like the lead metric.
That is definitely something I've thought about, and either I vibe code that or somebody listening to this raises their hand and says like, I want to build the leaderboard, because when you think about most crypto, leaderboards, it's like, well, how much did you trade, right? Like trading volume or how much do you hold is kind of the metric that is used to then reward you.
How much are you off on your trade? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But to do like, top,
how much did you send?
Top tippers, top givers, that's awesome. Now, of course, there will be the villainous people who try to break that system by tipping or giving to someone who they know, who happens to be them also in a different wallet. But, you can think through ways to make it work. And I think that's a fun game to play. Like you get like a badging system and, do weekly prizes and raffles and all that sort of thing. So definitely thinking about that. And I think it's important to keep momentum up, is building some sort of competitive elements to this, to encourage people to, to keep giving cool as a way of recognition.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I really like in terms of like a way of building and doing things in crypto, because there's just so much unknown and so much possible that most people haven't touched on, and yet a lot of people are doing stuff, but they're doing a lot of the same stuff as one another. There's not a whole lot of original thinking going on. And what I find interesting, like sort of one way to stumble into some original thinking is to do something like a little less strategically, like a little more casually, and basically just execute on like the very seed of an idea, or even just sort of like an intuition. Like when this guy tweeted at you to, launch a cool token, you're sort of realizing I can use his word as the name of the token and, like just respond, okay, let's create a cool token, like taking it literally, rather than, you could have done a number of things. You could have launched any token, you could have not launched any token at all. And instead you decide to go with the word cool for whatever reason, which probably didn't think too much or long or hard about. And then when you sort of start something that way, sort of less prescribed as to what you're going to do with it, I think it encourages sort of the probability that you might have original ideas of what to do with it thereafter, because you didn't start with like a strategy. You know what I mean? Like you start with like sort of a seed of something, if anything, and then have to figure it out from a very different place than most others are sort of coming from. And so yeah, I sort of like doing things that way as well. And like you with the games, and I think your same strategy that you're taking with the games, probably you're applying more broadly as well in terms of just like everything that you're doing, which is that, we live in a world where it's easier and easier to create things and make things and vibe code and whatever else. And, you can spend months and years working on something and hope that when you launch, people care or whatever. But like reality is, I think you just need, a fair number of shots on goal, and it's like hard to tell in advance what's going to work and what's not. And by sort of trying things and, not knowing exactly where they're going to lead, but following, your gut and making decisions along the way, like you can sort of find yourself walking down some interesting paths. So I like how cool is sort of like navigating down that now. Obviously, it's still pretty early, but I know like so far the giving thing has definitely struck a chord to some degree with a fair number of people. And I had sort of like, at first I saw it, I was like, okay, just, another meme coin. And obviously I like you and, know you from some time, but I didn't know that there was, I've launched meme coins myself, that there's nothing like to them. Like I just got bored and tagged Clanker or whatever. But so I sort of thought it might be one of those. And then like, you see someone working on something a week or two later. And it's funny, I sort of slipped and said like a year or two later, but as it's really, I meant a week or two later. And maybe it used to be a year or two later is sort of the type of persistence you needed to see from someone to know that they're actually serious about something. But now that like sort of the average amount of time working on something has shrunk to like, launching a coin, it goes up a bunch, it goes down a bunch, and you never hear about it after the first 3 days. Like just working on something for a couple of weeks sort of signals like, okay, they're actually going to give, they're going to give this some effort, and maybe they won't continue beyond even a couple of months, but like it's more than a 1 or 2 day thing. And so I think once I realized that Cool was more than that and sort of understood the mission that you were attaching it to, that's when it clicked for me that Cool was cool.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, Cool and the meme of Cool, and I guess the direction that I've tried to aim it is going to be a reflection of what people want. Like, do they care about showing appreciation and love to people through monetary mechanisms or not? And if they don't, then Cool dies, or Cool has to become another thing. But I like the strategy I've chosen. I want to give it a chance to breathe and see where it goes. And I want to continue to keep it really, really simple. I think that's kind of the key. Like a meme coin needs to be just stupidly simple. And I think that's, the ones that have thrived, like Doge and Mog and whatever, there's not a lot to it, right? They don't try to do all these things. They're just like, oh, I get it. Here's the headline, and I like it or I don't like it, and that's it. It's like a brand. It's like you don't need a lot to explain it. So that's where I'm at. And just like last point that I think is important for people who are playing with a Banker that is worth mentioning is that when a coin gets deployed on Banker, unlike other platforms like say Pump Fun or whatever, it automatically creates a liquidity pool that pays the creator fees. So in sort of the traditional meme coin arena, you launch a coin, whatever, you keep an allocation for yourself, and over time, in theory, you can sell some of it and make money. But other than that, you're kind of screwed. Like you're just working a job, running a coin, and not doing anything, or not getting paid for it. And if you sell, you get yelled at. And so with Banker, you get paid LP fees, both in the form of the native token, which in this case is Cool, and in WETH or ETH. And so you can just sell the ETH and live off of that, and nobody cares if you sell ETH, and hold on to the coin. So I've been taking all the fees that I've been earning in Cool token and then giving them away, because that's what I want people to do. And then keeping a little ETH for myself. So I think that's just an important point, is like what they've built is a much more sustainable model that encourages creators and founders to actually want to stick with their project, because they are actually incentivized to do so. And don't feel like they have to, sell the product that they're trying to promote, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think I don't know exactly, like these. Obviously, Banker and Clanker both are taking advantage of the like Uniswap V3 and like enabling those fees. No one is. I mean, you might know better than me, but like I know Uniswap V4 came out somewhat recently, and there was a launcher called Flaunch that I saw that was utilizing some of the V4 mechanics, I believe. But I don't know, I don't think that Clanker or Banker is using the V4. And I don't know what especially is enabled by the V4, honestly, but it'll be curious to see if, obviously like sort of Uniswap has been leading innovation on a lot for years. And it'll be curious to see if these dynamics continue to get like sort of improved and fixed, because like you said, it's like, I mean, all of these, like there's a bunch of token launchers, so to speak. Not all of them call themselves that, but each one has sort of their thing that they're good for, or maybe a couple of things, or maybe no things that they're good for. But they're sort of different, and I'm certainly still trying to figure out, what the heck to do about all of it, and what's right for what thing. But the one thing that I've sort of been leaning in on mostly has been that I think there's too much of a stigma on a lot of this, and like people are individually responsible, and like obviously if you go and create like a honeypot or something, you're doing something that's malicious and bad, and that's not cool at all. But if you're just trying things and people want to sort of follow along and buy some tokens or whatever, it's like they can make informed decisions and whatever. And like it feels like there's so much hesitance from good people to play with these things. And then so what results is the people playing with these things are, in terms of creating them, are, you know, a lot of these like sort of lower quality, I don't know, like it's just like sort of lower quality. And I think that's why it becomes a lot of copy pasting of the same ideas and whatever, and like not doing anything particularly interesting. And so I think the people who tend to care more about their reputation, you know, sort of like the higher integrity people and whatnot, like I'd love to see more of them just kind of playing around more with these new sort of things that are possible with crypto, and you're certainly doing that. So yeah, it's cool to watch.
Yeah, I'm trying to do it, and I mean, I think the skill set you identified of, you know, plucking out what's hot on the internet. I could have used it with my distribution to just crank out meme coins and like play in the trenches and extract a lot of money. But I do care about my reputation, and I think we've seen plenty of examples who maybe have a similar skill set, but they burn their reputations because they really were extractive in playing that game. And I think in my case, like I want to use that skill set to entertain and, you know, build with people and bring them along for the ride, and, you know, do it in a healthy, sustainable way where I can, you know, provide for myself as well. So that's the balance I'm trying to maintain. And there will always be people on the internet who still think you're a scammer and a rugger, no matter how hard you try to operate ethically. Them's the rules. But you know, I've invested a lot of my time in building this identity of Board, and I don't want to cut into its value by doing things that are unsavory.
Yeah, and I do also, last thing I'll say is I respect your willingness to experiment with that level of following, because I know even for me with just, you know, some thousands of followers, it feels harder to just kind of try things freely than when I was writing blog posts and publishing them into the void. You know, like it's so much easier when there's no audience, or, you know, an audience that rounds to zero. And, you know, compared to how, you know, these like larger numbers, you know, a few thousand followers isn't anything, but I like sort of know, I can sort of picture some of the faces in that audience of people that I know and respect and whatnot. And it's like, just becomes a little bit harder to try things and experiment more freely, because you do feel like maybe you have that like a little bit more reputational risk on what you've built for yourself and whatnot. And it's, as you know, it's hard and takes time. So to throw it all away is definitely not an enticing thing to think about. But yeah, anyway, love sort of the balance that you've been striking. I know that we're you know, over on time here, but appreciate the time that you have taken. It's always great talking with you, and yeah, can't wait to see what happens moving forward with the games, with Cool, and anything else that you're experimenting with.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. The 10 million Cool has already been transferred to you while we were discussing. And,
nice.
And I appreciate you having me on again, or having me on this particular podcast. Looking forward to catching up on past episodes, and yeah, appreciate everything you're doing as well, man.
Awesome. Thank you. And thanks for the Cool. And as a reminder for people who are listening, I think, what was the instructions? Tag you, let them know that, let you know that they listened and that they feel like they could get some Cool, and you'll send somewhere between 1 and 10 billion.
Right, exactly. Which I think is a really easy call to action. So this will be a way for you to test who's listening to your podcast. Go harass me on Twitter and then say you listen to it, and I'll send you some Cool. And if anybody wants to like keep track of my dumb projects and things I'm experimenting with, I set up a new website called boardcorp.com. The Board Corporation. So everything I do will be basically listed there.
Very nice. That's distinct from the Boring Company.
Exactly. Yes. Just to be clear, if Elon's lawyers are listening, it is a distinct entity. Even though I was Board Elon Musk before the Board Corporation existed, so they'll never take that away from me.
That's good. I'm sure, maybe there's some inspiration. We'll have to hear from Elon someday as to why he named the Boring Company what he did. But all right, cool. Well, and again, I find myself using the word without trying. But But yeah, the meme is working, and people are sending cool. So thanks again, and we'll talk more soon.
Sounds great.
All right, talk to you later. Bye bye.